about to leave, already packing. Come with me, I'm not really asking. We'll get away to a place where we don't know. About to see the world in action, what we can be, life with no distractions. We'll get away, this is what we waited for. Take my hand, we'll make it somehow. We can't miss out. I'm done living life with the lights out, die with my own doubts. Be free with me. Let's be free with me. Now looking back, eyes on the freeway, Bonnie and Clyde, a classic cliche. We're on the run, this is what we waited for. Take my hand, we'll make it somehow. We can't miss out. I'm done living life with the lights out, die with my own doubts. Be free.
Evening, everyone. It's Jim here at Tutu. Welcome to our latest A-Level Sociology live stream. I'm joined by Craig and Duncan again. I think it's our fifth in this series. So we are continuing our look at crime and deviance with a focus on media this week. Welcome if you're joining us live. And looks like I can hear some background noise. Is it, Duncan? Something going on in. Oh, okay. We're looking at crime and media, and so if you're joining us live, there's a chance for you to use the live chat to have a go at the questions and the activities that Craig and Duncan will take us through. If you're joining us on catch up and replay, there's no live chat facility for you, but it also means you get a bit more time to have a go at the activities. So what we'll do is we'll post a link at the end of the session to where you can catch all the slides from this session. No need to write anything down, just sit back for 30 minutes, have a go at the questions and see how you get on. So Craig, Duncan, who's going to lead us off today?
Let's have a look. Let's get started, and we.
I think it's me.
Get cracking with Craig.
Okay, thank you, Duncan. Thank you, Jim. What we're doing today, is we're going to look at some of the media and crime. And we're going to focus on some of the different theories of crime and deviance. Some of the different theories of how the media impacts on crime and deviance. What we're going to start off with today is a bubble quiz. We're going to look at one of the key kind of ideas in sociology is the fact that the media influences the level of crimes that influences the level of crime that is in society. So we're going to look at some of the ideas around folk devils and moral panics. So first of all, we're going to look at what's called a bubble quiz. There are a number of answers that are correct on this. You will get a question and you will get up to 4 answers. what you have to do is you have to identify the correct answers. Now, that can be 0 correct answers, it can be 4 correct answers, or anywhere in between. So if we have a look at our first question. Okay, so which of the following sociologists looked at the role of the media in increasing the level of crime? So how the media has increased crime. Is it A, Jock Young, B, Robert Merton, C, Stuart Hall, or D, Stan Cohen? Which of those theorists suggested that the media helps to increase levels of crime? Again, if you want to put your answers in the chat window, just put A, B, C, D, whatever responses you think are correct on the right-hand side.
Yeah, and remember with the bubble quiz, it might be one of them, it might be all of them, it could be anywhere in between those. Noticed a couple of people in the chat window saying they haven't got onto media yet, so this is going to give you a good insight into that. So it's a useful intro to it. But you probably have looked at some of you will recognize some of these names. You will have done them when you've been looking at general theory of crime as well. So
if you've I've just seen there, sort of like Magda says she's done interactionism. Interactionism sort of like has got a huge part to play, sort of like in the ideas of crime and in the role of media and crime and deviance and the way in which people react to those. So we've got a couple of people coming up with some responses through here. Beth and Rolika have both come up. Salma's come up with a response as well. There can be more than one correct answer in this. So if we look at those, who has talked about the role of the media in crime? Some people are coming through. So there seems to be a consensus that Stuart Hall and Stan Cohen are in there. Anybody sort of thinking that Young or Merton talked about the role of the media?
Beth's put Young.
Nobody seems to think they do.
Beth put
Young.
Yeah,
sorry. Yes, Beth did put Young and Cohen. Let's have a look at the responses. The correct answers, please, Jim. Yeah, it was 3 of those. Jock Young, Stuart Hall, and Stan Cohen all looked at the role of the media in crime. And
it's interesting with
how that impacted them. Sorry, go ahead, Duncan.
Interesting with Merton because it's quite a good red herring there, really, even though this isn't the red herring round. But it's just because obviously one of the ways in which people might develop their want for the American dream, etc., is through the media. But obviously that's a bit more indirect than what we looked at with the other 3.
Yeah, I mean, it was certainly sort of like the role of the media sort of like has taken off massively, sort of like in the last 50 or 60 years, sort of like after Merton's written his. I mean, of course, there was advertising that still existed around that time, and Merton talks about how American society generates these needs.
Yes.
But certainly Young, Hall, and Cohen, they specifically mentioned the role of the media in their research.
Absolutely.
Can we look at our second question, please, Jim? Okay, which of the following groups are more likely to be considered folk devils? Now, this is testing a little bit of your skills of application and looking at sort of like the potentially different groups that we could apply the idea of folk devils to. Remember, folk devils comes from the idea sort of like of Stanley Cohen. What folk devils are those who tend to perpetrate moral panic. They are the ones sort of like who are responsible for the behavior that leads towards a moral panic. So who out of these 4 groups are most likely to be seen as folk devils in the eyes of the media? Is it A, benefit recipients, B, young people, C, black males, or D, middle-class women? And again, there can be more than one correct answer. There could be no correct answers, or there could be all 4. So if you just put your answers in the right-hand side, who's most likely to be seen as being a folk devil out of these 4 groups? Or which of the groups are going to be seen as folk devils?
So if you think about the sort of particularly like tabloid newspapers and things like that, how are these different groups presented there in terms of likelihood of committing crime or of committing deviant behaviour of one sort or another? That will help if you're not familiar with the concept.
Yeah, in some ways, sort of like when people, I think Magda had mentioned earlier on, sort of like she's done labelling, which groups are most likely to be labelled as folk devils.
Yeah.
Who's most likely to be labelled as being more criminal. There's a few answers coming through. Kind of general consensus on young people and black males tend to be seen as folk devils.
And we've also had
we've also got somebody put benefit recipients. Yeah. Nobody's put middle class women as folk devils. Let's look at the correct answer.
Yeah, well done.
Yeah, those who said A, B, and C, well done. You have identified those. It's unlikely that middle-class women are going to be perceived as folk devils in the media. I don't even want to know a moral panic where middle-class women would be perceived as folk devils. Be quite a strange one. Let's move on to our next question. Now, as part of what Cohen said, he sort of looked at the idea of moral entrepreneurs. Okay, so which of the following groups may be described as moral entrepreneurs? Churches, the media, youth groups, or politicians? Who are most likely to push for changes on the back of a moral panic? Who are the moral entrepreneurs who pick it up and try and run to help create the folk devil? Which of those groups are most likely?
So again, this is very much linked to Stan Cohen's study, moral folk devils and moral panics.
Oops.
Oh. Someone's beeping. Someone's popular.
Someone's texting me the answer. Yeah.
Oh wow. Oh right, we've got some answers coming through.
Okay. So A, B, and D.
A, B, and D. We've got D. We've got C.
C. C. You think about these groups tend to be the ones who try to reassert their norms and values into society. These are the moral entrepreneurs are the ones who are suggesting that the behavior of folk devils is immoral. Okay, so who are the ones who are who are the groups that may be focusing on folk devils and seeing their behavior as negative in society?
Kind of doing the labeling, if you like, if you want to link it to labeling and labeling theory, who are applying those labels as people as being the folk devils or deviant.
Got some answers, A, B, and D. That's a good response from Ralika. Chloe's got A, B, and D, and they are both correct. Yes, religion and churches, any other forms of religion would be seen as a moral entrepreneur. And what they're looking to do is to maintain the kind of norms and values of society. The media, of course, they can be seen as moral entrepreneurs trying to push their values onto individuals. And politicians, very much so like I've seen as moral entrepreneurs, and particularly in relation to certain acts. Those of you who've done things like rave culture would say that politicians look to kind of reassert those norms and values, and as a consequence act as moral entrepreneurs. So we on to question 4, please. So we're going to look at some contemporary social issues now. Which of these could be described as a moral panic? Now, of course, a moral panic is something that changes the kind of norms and values of society. It's seen as going against society's morality. So the behavior sort of like we could see sort of like the issue around asylum seekers, the fuel crisis, terrorism, or the COVID pandemic. Which of those might we identify? I mean, these are all very contemporary issues that we're looking at. Which of these may be seen as being a moral panic? And again, focus on that word moral.
Panic. Yeah, I was going to say there's been a moral panic about it. And yeah, I think sometimes when people think about moral panics, they focus on the panic. And someone
they
said all these. Chloe said all, and I could certainly see how there's been a panic related to all of them, or you could see degrees of panic relating to all of them. But has there been a moral panic?
What this type of question is useful for is being able to apply your understanding of sociology to contemporary issues. And what you can then do is you can pick up some of these and develop those responses in an essay and sort of like say, well, actually, the context of a moral panic is still relevant because of this. And that's why it's sort of like we're identifying which ones that we may see as moral panics and which ones we may just see as general panics. Wide range of answers there. Let's go with which would be considered as described as a moral panic. It is A, asylum seekers, and C, terrorism. The reason being is that people perceive the behaviours to be immoral in some way, as going against the norms and values of what we would see as being our society. Of course, moral panics do tend to focus on the behavior of individuals. I mean, we can talk about things like moral panics and is it immoral in things like the fuel crisis to to kind of fill up your car. I've seen pictures of people trying to fill up jerry cans, even some people trying to fill up other containers and then putting it in their boot and saying, is this moral behavior? You could possibly see that as being the case, but it's not really a moral panic as such. Likewise with the COVID pandemic, the only aspect of that possibly people could sort of like see as being moral behavior is people's views on vaccination or wearing masks and things like that. But generally, the COVID pandemic was it's a global pandemic. It wasn't seen as being a moral panic. It was seen as being kind of a medical panic instead. And our last question, please. Now, which of the following explanations of crime examine media reactions, the reaction of the media? So does functionalism look at the reaction of the media in terms of when it looks at crime and deviance? Do interactionists, neo-Marxism and right realism, which of those look at the role of the media and their reactions? Now, again, if you've done some of these big theories, it may become a little bit more straightforward for you.
So it's quite possible people might not have encountered right realism yet. They might have done. You might have done. If you haven't, then that one might be a tricky one. But so a few people
are getting B.
Mm-hmm.
And you'd be right with B. I mean, interactionists do look at the reactions of the media. And of course, interactionism generally, it does focus on the aftermath of a crime rather than what causes a crime in the first place. Let's look at the answers. Quite a few has put B. Neo-Marxism as well. So the ideas of Alexis Stuart Hall, he would sort of like suggest that sort of like the impact of the media reactions on certain events, particularly looking, as we mentioned last week, about the crisis of Germany, and how that perpetrated the myth. How that perpetrated a very negative stereotype of black males and mugging. So. That covers that section. We'll move on to Duncan for our next activity.
Okay, this one's a reasonably quick one. You're going to get a countdown on the clock in a minute, but it's a pretty quick countdown on the clock. And I'm just asking you for 3 things. And we've already talked about some of them, but it's just really for us to kind of nail exactly where media comes into crime and deviance. Because there was an essay question, and Craig will remember this, couple of years ago, probably now, back when there were exams, about which was really broad. It was something like evaluate the relationship. Evaluate the relationship between media and crime, and that's so broad that I think it is quite useful just to think, well, what is the relationship between media and crime? Can we think of 3 ways in which they relate? We have touched on a couple of them already there, but let's see what you come up with. You may well come up with more than 3. So I'm about to suggest 3 in a minute, but there probably are more than 3 ways. But let's have the countdown and let's see what we come up with. That question I referred to there was a 30 marker, so you would need to be able to come up with a lot to say about it. Okay, 30 seconds goes pretty fast, doesn't it? So Chloe has mentioned moral panic and self-fulfilling prophecy. So that kind of links into what we've been talking about in the last activity, really, about kind of the reaction of the media to crime to a certain extent, but it also might tie into the media as a cause of crime to a certain extent. And we'll touch on that a bit more, the way that media both reacts to crime and reports crime, but also potentially through moral panics. And as Chloe mentions, potentially through self-fulfilling prophecy, through sort of labeling, it could be cause of crime. There's other ways the media might cause crime as well, which we'll talk about later. Media can over-exaggerate. Sorry, this is Rolika. So media can over-exaggerate certain events which may lead to the moral panic. So again, that links to it. And Angela, brilliant terminology there, deviancy amplification. So that links to 1 and 2 on my list, I suppose, because also the way that crimes are reported. So we've also got media can help unite people through the public debate. Oh, that's a nice functionalist idea to a certain extent. So that idea of boundary maintenance and social solidarity, where does that really take place? It does, it does in contemporary society. That takes place through the media primarily, doesn't it? I think that's quite a nice insight there. There's also,
particularly if you look at particularly if you look at sort of like the aftermath of incidents last week and sort of like how social solidarity, the idea of obviously with the kind of the attack on the Conservative MP
Yes.
David Amos, obviously sort of like there is a certain amount of social solidarity after that, and it does reaffirm kind of Durkheim's idea of boundary maintenance. So you see people unified from across parties.
And a lot of talk about talk about how people should behave in relationship to representatives and on social media and things like that. So there's a real sort of a really good example of that boundary maintenance there. Also, there's the representations of crime, criminals, and victims in the media, both fictional and real. Like in the news and in dramas and things. I think Craig's probably going to talk a bit more about that shortly. And then there's also the way the media can be used to commit crime, and particularly when we're talking about the new media. If we're talking about social media and the internet and things, it does open up methods of committing crimes, things like identity theft and fraud, and social media bullying and hate speech and organising terrorism, and all sorts of things can be done through the media. So, particularly in contemporary society, and if you get one of these questions about, society today, which often we do, the way the media can be used as a means of committing crime is something which you shouldn't neglect. Okay, so well done. Some really good answers there. I thought that was really interesting. Hand back to Craig.
Thank you. Thanks, Duncan. Just building on that, another one of the ways in which sort of like when you get that type of essay, you're looking at the relationships between media and crime. One of the other things that you may want to discuss are things like fictional and factual representations of crime within the media. So we are going to look at, we're going to do a connection wall activity now. And what I would like you to do is to identify 4 factors or 4 ideas. In the first instance, I would like you to look at 4 ideas that are linked into fictional representations of crime. So you see in the square in front of you, the 12 key terms, 12 key concepts. I want you to identify 4 of those that you might be able to link to fictional representations of crime. And then we'll look at another 4. We will look at factual representations of crime. Okay, and then we will try to guess the category for the remaining 4. So first of all, I want you to do is I want you to type in it in the chat column on the right hand side. If you talk about sort of like how, if you identify 4 key concepts there that talk about fictional representations of crime. I'm getting ahead of myself. There.
Yeah. So you can just do
so
a
if you think, for example,
summary of it.
So if, for example, you think that fictional representations of crime generate false needs, you would put that as a response in the right-hand side. If you did, I can tell you you'd be wrong. But, okay.
And you don't have to wait till you've got all 4. If you spot one, type it in.
No.
Okay. And if it's one where there's a lot of writing, you can come up with some way of abbreviating it if you like. Just pick out a key term from it.
So what we mean by fictional representations of crime is basically crime TV shows, books, novels, video games. How do they represent crime? What type of things do they have? What are these very stereotypical kind of ideas?
Death in Paradise. I'm trying to think of some more contemporary crime fiction, or TV that people might have watched. Various police dramas on the telly. Netflix is full of them, isn't there? How do they represent different groups?
Although interestingly, a lot of crime dramas nowadays sort of like tend to move away from these kind of tropes, and
they do, or they turn them on their head.
There's a lot more diversity.
Yeah, and they'll try and turn them on their head a bit and things. Yeah, so this is more kind of how it has traditionally been, I suppose. But I think, for example, I'm going to give one away. I think one that is still very much we see would be psycho strangers, wouldn't we? I mean, that's still very much a feature of crime dramas and things. That tends to be
yeah.
the
I mean, the one I'm
villain.
thinking of there, sort of like, is if you saw the Fall, that
Yeah.
had Psycho Stranger, kind of the psychotic stranger in there. Somebody's also put in there inaccurate motivations. That would be another one. Looking at the motivations, the idea would be that often there is, in fictional crime representations, the motivations of individuals are more complex in a crime drama than they are in real life. So what is called the ingenuity fallacy sometimes is that criminals are incredibly complex and they do things for a multitude of different reasons. So this would be the idea of inaccurate motivations.
Yeah, you get that.
Let's
like
look at some of the
Christie.
others then.
Sorry, I was just
Look
going
at
to
some
say
of the
that
other ones. I mean,
they're always
yeah,
like doing
definitely.
a nursery rhyme or something, aren't they? The murders are all like different verses from a nursery rhyme. Whatever, it would never happen in real life. Anyway, sorry, I digress.
Yeah, I mean, with the idea with inaccurate motivations is that most crime is committed for very simplistic reasons. It's either committed for greed, or most murders are a result of a brawl or kind of a domestic issue. Yet we overplay sort of like this idea of the psycho stranger, of somebody who has these complex motivations. But most crime is actually committed by particularly violent crime is committed by people who know each other. Another one in there is police getting their man, having a high success rate. Police are like always getting the man at the end of an episode. Large numbers of crimes do go unsolved. And the law of opposites, which was put forward by Surratt, who argued that there is almost an obsession with violent and sexual crimes in fictional representations of crime, when in reality most crime are things like property crimes. So our next one is looking at factual representations of crimes. Now, this can be through things like documentaries, or it can be through the news. What can we identify some of those ways in which the media represents individuals in factual representations of crime? What do they do?
So, which crimes make the news? That sort of thing.
And what does the news do when it does that? What does the news do when it does report crime? What type of crimes may it not focus on? What type of crimes might it focus on?
Right, that's giving you two of them. I think
That's giving you a big clue. Yes, certainly would underrepresent corporate crime. That would be one. One of the reasons, particularly Marxists, would argue that the control of the media means that corporate crime is massively underrepresented. Cybercrimes, no. I'll come back to that in a moment.
I mean, it's interesting. I mean, it's certainly lots of sociologists say that the media underrepresents corporate crime, and I think it would be true to say that it does. Occasionally, there are very high-profile corporate crimes that end up generating a lot of news coverage, aren't there? I mean, you do get big scandals sometimes, like Enron and things like that. Oh, Cooking with Debs has suggested one there. Simplification.
It is simplification, yeah. Often views are sort of like brought down to a very simplistic reason. It does overtly focus on violence and sexual crimes, and they are far more represented than they are actually exist in society. And the age fallacy. This looks at the idea that sort of we tend to present victims as being older. You can also talk about sort of like the idea that they do tend to be presented as more middle class as well. So we've got Maria come through as violent sexual crimes. What do we think the last category is then? We've got 4 here. The media generates false needs, imitation, cybercrime, and it transmits techniques. So what could be our other category that we're looking at? Ways in which media does what? What do those 4 things, what could those 4 things possibly do? Is there a way the media does something?
So imitation, we sometimes hear the phrase that we copycat crimes. We recognise that phrase.
Cybercrime, somebody mentioned earlier on, the media through cybercrime, through using the media, the media does what? There's a big kind of hint there with cybercrime.
By transmitting techniques, it might be like techniques to how to commit crime. People see it
Mm-hmm.
in the media,
Yeah.
and therefore that might
How
lead
to
to
get away with it.
investigation.
There's a Netflix program, How to Get Away with Murder, which I was
I've not
slightly
seen.
worried that my wife watched a lot.
I was going to say I've not seen that one. There we go.
She watched it on a regular basis. There you go. Yeah. It can increase levels of crime. So through generating false needs, through imitation, through people copying crimes that they have seen, through cybercrime, obviously, as uses the media to increase crimes, and through transmitting techniques. There used to be a program that was on called The Real Hustle, which showed you how to commit lots of scams. It hasn't been on for a long time. But also through things like online media, through YouTube, you can see videos sort of like where it talks about sort of like techniques of how to commit crime. But I'm not going to put those links in the chat box. Sorry.
No.
Okay, over to you, Duncan.
Brilliant. Okay, now I think we'll probably be able to be quicker on this than we normally are with an on balance, because we've just been talking about media causing crime. It's slightly more focused here. We're looking at a debate here about whether violent media causes violent crime. So, whether these sort of violent cop shows and things, whether that leads to people committing those sorts of crimes. So, first of all, we want some arguments or some evidence that supports the view that violent media might cause violent crime. And then we're going to look at some arguments on the other side. So you can use common sense here. You may know stuff. You may have covered this already, in which case you use it. Also, similarly, if any of you do media as your other topic, and have done any of that already as your optional topic in year 13, you may have some ideas for this as well. That's quite a good way of making some links across the course. So, any arguments in support of the idea that violent media might cause violent crime? You could even potentially bring some ideas from another subject. If you might have some psychologists among us, may have encountered some ideas about this as well.
There is a module in psychology of the media that you might do if you're doing AQA.
Yeah,
I think that's one of the options.
So, any ideas here? Any arguments or evidence that suggests that violent media might cause violent crime? So it might be things like violent video games, horror films, violent lyrics in heavy metal songs, rap songs, grime music. Pretending I know about these things, I know not. But you do get moral panics about this quite regularly, don't you? Where people say, "Oh, you mustn't go and see that film, or you mustn't play that game or you mustn't listen to this particular genre of music because it leads to violent crime." Is there any evidence to back that up? Shall we have a look at what I've put there? So there's a study that you may have come across, Bandora's Bobo Doll study, that backs up to a certain extent, a model that we look at in media, the hypodermic syringe model, which is the idea essentially that people receive messages from the media and embody them and take them on, and that might lead to copycat crimes. I don't know if any of you come across that study. It's one where kids watched adults sort of hitting this doll, and the ones who saw the adults hit the doll when they went in, they hit the doll, and the ones who didn't just played with it in different ways, whatever. And then, of course, there are real life examples that you could cite where it is suggested that the people who committed the crimes, one of the things that influenced them to commit the crimes was media messages that they'd received. So the people who did the Columbine High School massacre, there was a lot of media interest in the fact that they'd been listening to Marilyn Manson records. The killers
and the Matrix.
And the Matrix, was it the Matrix as well? And the killers of Jamie Bulger.
The Matrix,
had been watching one of the
Child's
Bride of
Play
Chucky
3.
or something. One of those films, Chucky. Yeah, Child's Play. They've also there was someone dressed up as the Joker who did a shooting in a cinema and things. So that there are sort of real life examples that you could cite to sort of back up that argument. What about the other side then? What criticisms could we make of that argument? You can either criticise those particular points or come up with some other arguments against this view. I mean, maybe
I think one thing to think about there is maybe the volume of crime that is committed.
Mm-hmm.
You know?
Yeah, and
How
the
often
number of
do we
the number of
see?
the number of people who watch those films, play those games, listen to that music, who don't do that. So left realists argue that the media just increases relative deprivation.
It it can do so, like obviously,
Mm-hmm.
sort of like through promoting advertising,
Yeah,
in a very similar way to the likes of Merton would suggest, and criminogenic capitalism, the idea of promoting
yes, the false needs idea.
deprivation.
Yeah, it
Yeah.
can do. So I wouldn't see that as a direct criticism of the idea that violent media might cause violent crime, but it is an alternative way in which the media might lead to criminal activity. You could look at. I mean, shall we have a look at my suggestions here? So you could criticise Bandora's Bovendol study directly if you were using that example. So there are methodological criticisms of it, lacks validity. Just because kids would copy adults hitting a doll doesn't mean that they would be actually violent. Essentially, they were shown how to play with the doll and therefore played with it in that way.
Yeah.
And there's lots of debate about those real life examples. What were the real explanations for those terrible crimes? And it would be hard to say that the media was the only or even the main cause of it, because as Craig was suggesting before, lots of people play video games or watch films or listen to music and don't commit crimes as a result of it. So there are obviously other causes. Whether it was an aggravating factor in some way is certainly a serious thing to consider, but as the cause of it, that would certainly be an argument to suggest it wasn't. So there's quite an interesting debate there. It's the sort of thing that could come up as a question, so it's worth having a think about that. I mean, obviously it might be that it would be a narrow part of a broader question about media causing crime, but it's something to consider. Okay, I'm going to pass back to Craig for a little bit on news values, I think, now.
That's right. One of the other types of questions you may get asked is ways in which the media can alter our perception of crime. And that was I think it was a 4-mark question, maybe a few years ago, maybe a 6-mark question a few years ago. And ways in which the media can alter our perception of crime. And one way it can do this is through the way in which the news reports different types of crime. Now, we've done this activity a couple of times so far. What I'm going to show you is a paragraph that I've written that may answer a question. However, I've omitted some of the key details, and what you have to do is identify the key concepts. You may be able to do that from the text. But let's have a look at this. One way the media can alter our perception of crime is through blank. Okay. Now, you might need to read on a little bit to sort of like identify that, because there's lots of ways in which the media can alter our perception. According to Galtung and Rouge, these are factors that influence an editorial team's selection of events for reporting in the news. So what is the blank? It was, as our hint, it was introduced by Galtung and Rouge, and it influences an editorial team's selection of events. So what is the key concept there?
So you may not
have already mentioned
this. I may have already mentioned it. You may not have encountered it other than when I just mentioned it a few minutes ago, but you will do at some point, especially if you do media as your other topic.
Yeah, I think it depends. I think it depends on on how you structure how your teachers have structured your course. Some people start with media and crime. Some people do it just after interactionism. Some people do it just before they do globalization and crime. So, Duncan, you mentioned this concept earlier on at the start of the activity.
I did. So, it is what we call news values, isn't it? Yeah.
It is news values. And let's look at our second. So, what the remainder of the blanks are different types of news values. Okay. So, one example is blank, which refers to the size and scale of the event that has taken place. Which news value looks at the idea of the size and scale of the event? A further example is that of, sorry?
I was just going to say, people watching on catch up obviously have the benefit that they can pause the video here and have a little think about some of these.
You certainly can.
Yeah.
And you can also download. These like after the event as well. So you can actually look at them in writing. A further example of that is of blank blank, which suggests that news is often comprised of events that concern the lives of those who are famous or have power. So who else might we focus on? And a final example is that of blank, which allows news teams to focus on the acts of an individual rather than complex social forces. So this is a bit of a tough one if you've not done news values. So far, we've got news values in there. The first example, scale and size of an event. The second, focus on those who are famous or have power. And the third one, focus on the acts of an individual. So as we can see here, so threshold is the one with size and scale. Elite people, the news is focused on more on elite people. And the final example is personification, which allows news teams to focus on the acts of an individual. Okay, over to you, Duncan.
Okay, so we just got one last activity. I'm determined to make you love word smash, so this might be my last time for a bit, but we thought we'd have another go at word smash. So we've got some key terms here which you will smash together with the pictures. So the example on the screen, just to help you if you haven't seen this before, is you've got an elephant and you've got the southernmost continent in the world, home to the South Pole, which is obviously Antarctica, so it's Elephantarctica, elephant in Antarctica, Elephantarctica. So that's what you're doing with these next activities. You've got to try and identify what the picture is and then smash it together with the clue on the other side. So we have somewhere on a map, and we've got the author of Folk Devils and Moral Panics. So what do we reckon? Anyone want to do it? Anyone know either half? That would probably be a good starting point. I think lots of people know the author of Folk Devils and Moral Panics. So
we should merge with the geography. Kind of
if we got the geography people on as well, they'd be. So Maria said Cohen. It is Cohen. Do we know what Cohen's first name is? Oh, someone's had a go there. Deviance and modification spiral. I like that. I don't know. I don't quite understand it, but I like it. Someone's had a very good go
not
there.
Bad.
Afghanistan, Cohen. It is definitely somewhere Stan, Cohen. You're nearly there. Shall we have a look? I think it'd be pretty impressive if someone recognised Uzbekistan, Cohen. Yes, well done. 2-2, got it. There are a few stands in that particular part of the world, but it was Uzbekistan on this particular case. Well done. Shall we have a look at the next one? Okay, so we've got a photograph. What are they? And then the idea that the media makes people more aware of the impact of crime. So this is the idea, and it's quite a complex one, this, because I'm going to give you the opposite first of all. So the opposite is more common, and it relates to those sort of copycat crimes and things that we were talking about earlier, which is something called desensitization, which is the idea that people, when they see violence and things in the media, they become desensitized to it, and therefore, they might commit violent acts themselves because they're not shocked by it. But an alternative view is the opposite of that. In fact, that people see it in the media and see the consequences, and therefore are less likely to commit those sorts of crimes because they understand the consequences of it because they've seen it in the media. So they are.
They can also be more. They can also be more. With the second one, it can also make them more fearful of crime, can't it?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, more
with the second idea. And they're not my trousers, by the way.
No, they're not my trousers. Moral panic is not the correct claim.
No.
They are lederhosen, so the second word needs to start with sen. Shall we have a look? It's lederhosensitization, lederhosen and sensitization. So sensitization is a really good term to learn and understand. That's a good one to be able to deploy and bring out in an essay or an answer. I think we've got one more of these. So we've got a film DVD cover there. I've blanked out the title of the film. And then A Crime Made Easier by New Media, especially social media. Okay, does anyone recognise what the film is? It does say Matt Damon is, and then if you might have to squint and see if you can work out what the film is. I'll give you a clue. It's the first in a series of films. There's a series of films there. And then can you link it with the crime mentioned on the right-hand side? A crime that's made easier by new media, especially social media. It's not Forrest Gump. It's I don't think
Forrest
Matt
Gump
Damon,
crime.
I don't think Matt Damon was in Forrest Gump. Okay.
Why in your syllabus is there no crime related to media? It might be just media. It depends what syllabus you're doing. I mean, if you, for example, I know OCR crime is. I think crime may be an option, but media, we may have different options. So it might be that you don't have crime, but you do media instead. Some of the international boards, you might not do crime. So there are a range of different boards. We're focusing at the minute on sort of like one of the core modules, which is crime and deviance, which is in the AQA specification. Yeah. So it depends on which board it is.
Absolutely. We've had a suggestion there, identity crime, and that is what the right-hand side is. It is identity crime. So it's what's the left. It's the Bourne Identity. It is quite an old film now. I do apologize. The Bourne Identity theft, but the Bourne Identity and identity theft. Okay, so well done. I think people had a bit more of a go with the word smash this time.
Definitely.
So well done.
We're getting the idea,
guys.
Duncan. We are getting the idea. I just made a note to come up with some suggestions for the word smash in the next session. Ideally, with chitty chitty bang bang will be in one, and maybe Sound of Music. There's lots we can do.
Okay, that'd be good. Okay, someone's asked.
Just to answer that question, go on.
We will do some beliefs. Yeah, later on, we'll come to some beliefs later on. Absolutely,
superb.
And we have done some before.
I was just going to say, if you go to the link on the screen there, tutor2u.net/live, you can replay not just this session, which you might want to, but also everything else we've done this term. But going back earlier this year, I think we did about 15 or 16 A-Level Sociology sessions across a variety of different topics: families, education, research methods, theory and methods, beliefs, loads of stuff on there. Might be worth having an explore of that. Go to that link and go to the replay section and just check sociology from the drop-down list of the many subjects that are on offer. I think there's about 300 live streams now that you could have a look at, depending on your subjects. Not all featuring Craig and Duncan, but many of them do. Oh. And once again, a huge thanks to our two gents for putting together another fantastic session. Hopefully you found it useful. If you have, give us a thumbs up on YouTube, because that helps us get discovered by other... There we go. Craig, Duncan showing how to do it. Helps us get discovered by other sociology students on the lookout for a bit of help ahead of maybe some mocks or exams. We take a short break over half term now for a week or two, but we're back fresh and ready to go with some more A-Level Sociology revision. So hopefully we'll catch you then. So from all of us, we'll see you later.
Bye. See you soon.